Today we're going to have a discussion revolving around contrast and unity. A couple of questions we're going to be asking ourselves while we're looking at these pieces is what's causing these elements to come together, what's creating this sense of unity, what's driving them apart, and how are these ideas supporting the intentions of the artist. So how are artists using these very formal ideas of design and these visual aspects to reinforce these conceptual ideas they're trying to convey in their actual pieces of artwork? The first slide that I wanted to look at here is by Winslow Homer. This is a watercolor made in 1904, and this is just referred to as palm trees in Florida. A lot of Winslow Homer's work is in watercolor. He also produced a lot of work in Florida and a lot of maritime images of him with boats, and most of his stuff is outdoors. He did create most of these paintings on location, which is the great part about watercolor, is that it's allows you to get out of the studio and go work on site. Although artists could, at this point, 1904, create paint tubes of oil paint and go and paint with oil on spot, but watercolor in America at this time was becoming very popular, and not only for professional artists like Homer, but also for a lot of amateur artists to go and work on location. The question we're asking here, looking at this piece, what elements is Homer using to unify the image? But also, what is it that he's doing that creates contrast in the image that's creating interest, and how are these elements being used to support the subject that he's depicting?
I think color and value are both pulling together and driving apart. So the color scheme of blue, yellow, and green being somewhat analogous seems to dominate the image. It varies a little bit. There's some arguably contrasting colors with those flecks of red, but the overall dominance of those three colors seem to pull it together. Yet, at the same time, there's this vast dichotomy of value from darks, black, to whites, and it jumps things apart. There's also that sense of shapes being the ground and the foreground that drive it apart a little bit, but color both harmonizes and contrasts this image.
And I also see line, bringing together, unifying the palm trees in the foreground, but also separating it from the background with the more organic, flowy lines of the clouds. It's more calm. But also that diagonal of the cloud makes it more dynamic and also connects the background into the foreground and kind of draws your eye back in to the foreground so that you're not fading back and standing static there.
And you mentioned, Mr. Lehman, the fact that the contrast in color is very it's a high contrast in this image. So the clouds in the back are very white, and the lower left is very dark. And if you divide this whole image up, the color is very separated. Is that all the greens sort of together, the blue has these very specific shapes. And so if we broke this down into a flat image, the colors are almost like puzzle pieces. And I think the real unifier Homer's using here is the repetition of these spiny palm trees. And so we are seeing the large one in the bottom right in the foreground, and that sort of leads us rhythmically back through the image, because we're starting there and then we're sort of moving back to the left, following that green sort of pathway. And the repetition, if we're talking about unity, we're seeing repetition of those linear aspects, the spiny texture of the palm trees leading us back through the piece. Those are what's really sort of linking the entire image together, even though all of the colors are very different in value, but then also in different hue as well. So the next piece we're looking at here is a more contemporary piece by Ingrid Kaleem. This is number 196 drawing. This is made in 2005, color pencil on Mylar. And the process she uses is a bit different. She has a whole team of people she works with, and they will look at a specific site. This was on the banks of a river, I believe, and they will create these tracings of that actual site. So they'll take clear mylar, which is basically like a clear plastic, and take all these different colors of color pencils and trace actual elements and put it physically on top of elements on the site, trace those elements, and then sort of combine all of them together. And so she's working with this sort of contemporary idea, but it's really building on more traditional ideas. She's just sort of interpreting it differently. Often when an artist creates a piece of artwork, a very final piece in a traditional sense, it can often be a composite of other things. If we looked at, say, Van Gogh's Starry Night, that was a composite image of 3 different sites on a singular location, and he combined all of them to create a singular image in a much more traditional format. And here Claim is essentially doing the same thing. She's sort of gathering these elements from different aspects of a location and then using her skills as an artist to combine these ideas and creating a visually comprehensive image.
Certainly line is used to unify the piece, yet the variety of thicknesses of those lines, intensities of those lines, and colors of those lines offer some variety, some diversity, if you will.
Yeah, and I think the shape, the rhythm of the shapes, the organic shapes, cause a really nice unification of the entire composition. Although they're not the same, they are, portraying that nice rhythm, that they're close enough in similarity that they come together nicely and unify the entire piece, but at the same time contrast because they're not exactly the same shape.
Well, I thought this was a good piece to talk about the discussion of contrast and unity because she's using one element of art here, line, so we have the repetition already that's going to create a sense of unity. So this whole thing is built up from lines, and so she's creating contrast through shifting the color of the line or sometimes the width in some areas. And so this very slight change creates a variety that's going to be able to add interest to the piece. And it would look very different if these were all the same hue, for example, or if they were the same width. And here, these very subtle differences we pick up on because she's only using this one element of art of using line.
I think another interesting thing about this is the concept that she's working with here. She is studying landforms, maps, if you will, and harnessing that scientific exploration to create an artistic exploration or investigation. It's an interesting process. Where does art come from? There is no one singular path.
And I think she's taking these ideas of gathering information, right? This is essentially going out into the field and gathering information, just like an artist goes out and draws from observation and then later uses that to interpret things. There's other things, other ways in which we can interpret the world around us other than just drawing straight from observation. There's other ways that we can extract material from the world around us.
It's an interesting question. Can artists trace and still call it their own? In this case, I'd argue most definitely, yes.
All right, this last piece that I wanted to look at was by A.M. Cassandra, who was a commercial artist. And this is called the LMS Best Way. This was a poster done in 1928. I wouldn't look at a commercial piece because Cassandra is an excellent artist as far as creating visually engaging images. A lot of his stuff was in the poster advertisements, this golden age of when posters were still prevalent as a form of marketing before advertising and television and radio really took off. Is that these visually striking, and before photography really made its way into advertising as much as it is now. You see some great examples of illustrations, especially for traveling posters at that time. Cassandra, I would say, formally, from a design perspective, is the best at from that era, or certainly one of the leading artists.
If you look at this image, you definitely see LMS Bestway, the wheels of this locomotive appearing there in the lower portions, the track at the very bottom. But I find a lot of the unification that comes to this image is being created through the negative space. Because the positive shapes are not completely defined or completely enclosed, it encourages the viewer, when looking at the image, to flow easily from one area to another with those dark, black, negative spaces.
One other thing that I think Cassandra is great to look at and analyze his work is that his level of repetition. And so if we look at this piece and really break it apart, we see this repetition of the circle. And not only is it using repetition of the circle, he's using it very structurally. If we look at the middle of the wheels, this circle is a particular size, and then we see the circle to the right of that. It's exactly half the size as that larger circle. The entirety of the wheel is going to be very specific units of circles that he's using, and so even in the dots in the LMS at the top are exactly 3 to that, and so he's using this sort of structured measurement of the circle throughout the entire piece as a way of unifying it by placing this element throughout the entire piece. He's just very clever about how he uses that structurally in it.
Look at the way the bottom of the Bestway text creates the top of the circle.
He's very selective on how much visual information he's giving us. Is that we are immediately seeing this as a train, even though we are only seeing a very small segment of it, and most of this image is very dark, and it's sort of working with this sense of abstraction that we then have to fill in the blanks visually ourselves within the piece. So yes, we use that idea of closure of the Bestway connecting with the bottom sense of that circle, but we're filling the blanks. The principle there is we are thusly more engaged with this image compared to an image where we are just given everything, because we have to be interacting with this image to sort of make sense of it.
I think anytime you're looking at a work of art, there are things you're going to find that you connect to, things that you don't connect to. So I've identified that I'm drawn to this piece. I think a lot of it is due to my preference to what Mr. Clark just identified earlier, and that is the fact that so many aspects of this image are unfinished, unresolved, unclear, fading into that negative void. For me, spoon-feeding my audience with all the information that's needed in a piece, whether that helps to unify it or create contrast, for me it's unnecessary. The unification of this piece and the contrast of values and everything just seems to come together with just the right amount of information, and for me that's very appealing. For others it might be a distraction, but it definitely arguably creates balance and compositional success.